Welcome to Tossing Grenades at Windmills. Windmills.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm TC Ricks, and I'll be reading Unfood for you today. Unfood by TC Ricks. Freight Kasnicket was dying. He knew why now. It was unfood. It tasted like food. It smelled like food. It felt like food. It wasn't. No matter how much he wanted it to be. But that didn't stop him from looking at the ship's console one more time. The dark, misty corridors all looked alike to him. He was trapped like a rat. But there was no cheese at the end of this maze. This was particularly ironic, since for the past 2 weeks he had eaten better than he had in his entire life. The job had started out simply enough. He had been approached by a fat blob who wanted him to smuggle some food. Work was scarce for independent pilots here ever since the cheat gate had been opened up, and the amount the blob had been willing to pay was obscene. The console lit up. It took Freight a moment to figure out what might have caused it. He sat straight up in his chair, causing the bandolier to jab painfully into his ribs. It was a life form of some kind. He started to run and then felt a pain in his kidneys. Everything hurt. He slowed down just a little. Impossible fantasies of rescue wove around in his head. It could be someone else. But how? He'd never seen a hint that anyone was left. Aliens? Freight laughed until his belly hurt, which was about 2 seconds. He took all the escalators and elevators he could to conserve calories. Laziness was a strategy for survival now. He arrived at the spot indicated on the console and looked around. It was a juncture in the middle of 2 corridors. No one was there. Nothing was there. What in the hell was giving out that reading? He listened. Then he heard something scurry. He checked his comm. The scurrying was still there, but he didn't see it. Then he saw a worn wall sensor and groaned. Another false start. He heard the scurrying again. He wasn't imagining it. He carefully tapped the wall, and the noise increased. Using his ears and his comm, he kept tapping and following the noise until he saw a rat dash from one end of the console to the other. Quick as a flash, he drew his blaster and shot the thing. Instantly, it was burned to a crisp, and he cursed himself for not using a spear. Not that this made sense, of course, but his stomach didn't care. How many calories he'd wasted. Yet again he cursed God. Yet again he cursed the blob. Yet again he cursed himself. Freight remembered the day when the blob had come to him. He had just been cheated by a small contract with one of the red conglomerates, and he had heard that they had a ruthless reputation, but the reward had seemed worth the risk at the time. Once he had hit port, the bribed customs officers had been arrested in a massive sting operation. His Freight had been the scapegoat, and only his immediate cooperation had been enough to stave off jail. But the financial penalty to his corporation had been barely enough to keep the docking fees off and get his ship into space again. Then the blob showed up. He said, "Have you ever heard of the Gem of Doom?" "Can't say that I have," Freight said, as he put down the spanner he used as a chew toy when he was nervous or deep in thought. "It's horrible, beyond horror. The insurance cartel mandates a minimum level of vivaciousness from all upper-level employees. I'm not an employee. I'm supposed to be rich, but for tax purposes, I have to stay on as CEO of the board of a family company." The blob waddled back and forth and sat in Freight's guest chair. "I'm fat. I like being fat. It's a sign of office, a badge of honor. The insurance cartel says that it sets a bad example. They keep sending me to fat camps, and I keep finding ways to bypass their stupid system. Now they have something new, a ship with almost no food, cloaked in the depths of space where no one could find it." Freight was certainly impressed with how nervous the blob looked. "I can't go hungry. Have you ever known true hunger, Captain Kasnicket?" "I can't say that I have, not honestly." "Well, I have, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I'm prepared to pay you 3,000,000 credits to shadow us and smuggle me a candy bar. Yes, that's right, just one. My people says there is only room for one rendezvous, and the ship's scanners are too advanced to smuggle anything more on board. But just one candy bar will be worth it. This isn't just about hunger anymore. It's about the principle of the thing. Tell me, are you in, Captain? How could Freight argue with luck like that? So he loaded up the ship and headed to the coordinates the blob had given him. It seemed like a simple job. Of course, that should have been Freight's first indication that something was wrong. He never got easy jobs. 3 weeks later, he saw the ship on the edge of his radar. The telemetry said that it was owned by the Helmont Corporation. It had a number but no name. Bad luck. Very bad luck. Most corporations allowed their ships to be named, but a few considered it a waste of time. Freight opened up the sensor suite to see if the fat ship was scanning. It wasn't. That was a good thing. Theoretically, anyway. He moved his ship up alongside the airlock, where he was supposed to meet the blob. He waited 3 hours, and the ship still continued moving along without lighting up its sensors even once. How could the crew allow that? Letting the ship run without its sensors was a good way to lose a ship. Finally, he risked a ping and found out that there wasn't anybody on the ship. Freight swore. What the hell was going on? He opened up the airlock and went inside. It was eerily empty. He checked the log in the captain's suite, there was an extremely well-decorated wood-paneled office inside. Freight discovered that somehow the Helmont Corporation had gotten word that Freight was coming. Rather than allow the clients to get away with it, they'd taken them off to a rented maximum security prison to shuffle all the clients off, and to prevent any of them from escaping, they'd sent the ship back along its regular course. Great. So much for the delivery. Freight wasn't going to break into a prison for the blob. He cracked open the case and began to chow down on the spricky-spracky snack bar. It was okay, but the vibe had gotten a little weird in the cargo hold. He began to explore the ship. Freight had to admit he was curious about what the heck was going on. An alarm went off on his wrist brace. He looked down and saw that the airlock had been disconnected. Panicked, Freight put on his helmet and ran as fast as he could back toward his ship. He moved through the corridors, trying to cut a few corners, though in a few cases he was forced to double back. At one point, the gravity plates between the sections hadn't been aligned properly, and he tripped. He hit his head on a bulkhead and was knocked unconscious. When he came to, his ship was long gone, and he was locked out of all the controls on the Helmont ship. They'd set the ship for slow cruise of 3 months, which meant he was stuck here without any of his gear for at least that long. And that was assuming he wasn't arrested for trespassing. He remembered the first bite of Unfood that he'd tasted. It had been incredible. Most of the food for people of his wage level was artificial on some level. You knew it was fake, but you lived with it. You only had real food for special occasions like Corp Day, Christmas, or the 4th. You could always taste the faint hint of soy or algae or something else that they made the real stuff from and made to mimic something else. But this stuff was different. It tasted just like real food. The bizarre videos he'd seen explaining the nature of the fat cruise said that all the food had no calories at all, that you could eat as much as you wanted and not gain any weight. Freight had never really known he could eat so much that he'd grown almost as fat as most of the richer folk. But he knew good food when he tasted it. It had been almost 5 days before he bothered to eat anything real, and it tasted horrible by comparison. The spricky-spracky snack bar was designed to have exactly 500 calories. It was designed to be part of a nutritiously balanced meal. Yet most of the time on long voyages, it was pretty much the whole meal. Intellectually, he knew that he should have some calories, but compared to the amazing foods he'd been eating, it tasted like shit. Mashed potatoes, handmade Italian pasta, fresh roasted vegetable medley, New York strip sirloin steak, creme brulee. The scents and sounds were amazing. The machine could manufacture whatever he wished. He even tried more conventional food like yuck burgers and fish sticks, but they were with real food, and he could taste the difference. Somehow the machine scrubbed out the purifiers and the preservatives and the mood enhancers and the quasi-addictors. Without all the additional chemicals, he was in bliss. It was a tasteful extravaganza that he never wanted to give up. until his stomach had started to hurt. Freight took a break and drank a lot of water. He'd figured he'd just eaten too much. He felt better after a few hours, but still felt a little weak. Oh, how glorious were the scents. Freight had attended the zoos and botanical gardens as a part of his crèche, just like anybody else. His self-imposed economic doom had only occurred when he'd skipped out as soon as he was legally able. He wanted to see the stars, and while adventure paid in many ways, it was hardly a lucrative career. The smells he had collected there had slowly built up. He had realized he had a nose for living things. He could discern the subtle differences between one kind of living thing and another. The keepers were quite astonished, and in high school he had tried to join a wine tasting club. Unfortunately, he had been on a regressive planet which was quite strict about such things. He tried a few times since leaving, always looking out for a place in his utilitarian jumpsuits amongst the latest fashion trends. He enjoyed the scents, but he hated the company. They were fake. The scents were not. And yet here, he could smell the food and could not tell the difference. The heavenly aromas made his mind bleed with yearning for unfulfilled desires. It was a heaven in which he intended to indulge. Since he had as much as he could eat, he began to go through the menu alphabetically. Aardvark, artichokes. He sampled a little bit at a time all the way up until he got to butterscotch. The thing had thousands upon thousands of different recipes. At this rate, he could not even finish by the time he was rescued. He decided to try only the most popular dishes for now. On the seventh day God rested, and Freight knew pain. He'd never felt real hunger before. The food might be crap, and one might always be scrambling for more of it, but a gnawing feeling hit his stomach, and it wasn't enough to quash it with Unfood. That helped, but he felt thin somehow, almost empty. And still the cornucopia yielded her unyielding bounty. The machine mixed and mingled the basic elements of life to create art. Rationally, he knew that most of the things he was eating were a masterfully created illusion. It mimicked with precise heuristic mastery the best techniques of the best chefs throughout the ages. Legions of them tirelessly working in digital culinary phantoms inside their virtual prison inside the machine. Of course, they were not sentient. The world had long since grown past such monstrosities. But the practical upside was that over 100,000 years of passion for the cooking arts resided within the box. But the same mastery had been twisted to create that which provided no nourishment of any kind. Beyond dietary requirements, the meals contained a careful regimen of vitamins and other basic building blocks of the human physique. He knew something was wrong, but the machine was the only real entertainment on the ship. It wasn't that there weren't plenty of holocubes or games of the like, but Freight couldn't stand any of that. He'd always been a boots-on-the-ground kind of guy. It was why he'd become a pilot. He began making model buildings out of the Unfood. He made a small hot dog town, a gingerbread house, and a bridge made out of peanut butter. It took 2 days, but when he was done, he began to stomp through his creation like an avenging dark god beneath his giant feet. He roared in triumph, but then the pain was absolutely overwhelming. He doubled over and almost blacked out. He lay there for an hour and a half. Something was clearly wrong.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson.
Copyright 2015, Red Anvil Amalgamated, LLC. All products available on Amazon.com and other markets.
To fight the forces of evil!